Good morning, please be seated. All right, good morning and welcome back to docket number 24-1201. Are there administrative matters before we begin today? Attorney Tisler.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Gillette. I just wanted to confirm that we were on the same page regarding read-ins. The company has it that only read-in U is outstanding. Does that align with what you have?
Can check. I have S as potentially outstanding. S as in Sam.
Okay, I did review the transcript from that day last night, and it appeared to me that that one may have been answered within that hearing.
Okay.
If it's helpful, on Monday, I can provide a citation for that in the transcript.
I would appreciate that, or we can look too. But besides that, it looks like my notes match yours.
And I had one more administrative issue, which is for late file 125 yesterday, we were asked to produce and we consented to produce the 1996 NARUC manual on depreciation. The witness advised me after the hearing that that's actually subject to copyright that's held by NARUC and they charge a fee for it. And so we're going to ask Keegan Whirland to reach out to NARUC and just get their consent to produce it.
Okay.
But if for some reason there's a problem, we have no objection if PURA, because you're a member of NARUC and or the OCC, is able to get consent. We stipulate on the record to having that introduced by PURA through administrative notice or through the OCC, and we'll produce Mr. Alice at the late file hearing to take questions on it.
Thank you. I think that's a good solution. So my only column is I have it listed as 126. I think you might have just said 125. So I'm going to just, I have 125 as a LFE for OCC for them to provide the contract for services between them and their witness.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, very good. So how do we want to effectuate this? Do you just want to put a note in response to that LFE prompt that you are unable to secure it, or?
We're going to endeavor first to secure permission. So we'll reach out to NARUC, and if they grant consent, we'll file it. If they don't, then we'll just provide an update in the late file in terms of what our efforts were and stipulate that we consent to having PURA take administrative notice, and we'll produce the witness at the late file.
Thank you. Okay, anything further this morning from the companies?
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Any administrative matters from other parties or interveners? No. Okay, then let's proceed into our panel for the day, the company's performance-based rate making panel. If the company could please introduce its witness panel.
Thank you. To the panel members, would each of you please state your full names and positions for the record?
Seth Kruger, Vice President, Gas Engineering, Eversource Service Company.
Julia Day, Director of Gas System Engineering for Eversource Energy Service Company.
Julia Freyer, Managing Director for London Economics International, LLC.
Doug Horton, Vice President of Distribution Rates and Regulatory Requirements for Eversource Energy Service Company.
Kevin Kelly, President of Gas Distribution Business, Eversource Energy Service Company.
John Lawrence, Senior Vice President of Customer Operations and Digital Strategy and Chief Customer Officer for Eversource Energy Services Company.
Maggie Cozzano, Director of Gas Meter Services for Eversource Energy Company.
Sherilyn Trinidad, London Economics Director.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Horton, Mr. Lawrence, and Ms. Day were previously sworn.
Very good. If the other witnesses could please raise your right hand, I'll administer the oath, at the conclusion of which, if you could say, I do. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
Thank you. Attorney Tisler.
Ms. Freyer and Ms. Trinidad, as part of your preparation for this docket, did you provide pre-filed direct testimony and exhibits which were marked as exhibits YGS PBR1, YGS PBR2, YGS PBR2A, and YGS PBR2B?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Do you have any updates or corrections to your pre-filed testimonies not previously identified for the record in interrogatory responses?
No, we do not.
No.
Do you adopt your pre-filed testimonies as part of your sworn testimony in this proceeding?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Kruger and Ms. Cusino, as part of your preparation for this docket, did you provide pre-filed direct testimony and exhibits which were marked as exhibits YGS Metrics 1 and YGS Metrics 2?
Yes.
Yes.
To the panel, to the extent there are interrogatory responses not yet adopted, did you sponsor responses to interrogatories submitted in this proceeding?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have any updates or corrections to your pre-filed testimonies or interrogatory responses not previously identified for the record in interrogatory responses?
No.
Do you adopt your interrogatory responses and sworn testimony, and your testimony as your sworn testimony in this proceeding?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Horton, why should PBR be considered and approved for Yankee in this proceeding, given that PBR design is still currently being discussed in the electric sector?
Yes, we have several factors and consider it appropriate to adopt PBR in this proceeding at this time. First and foremost, there's statutory and policy support here in Connecticut to implement PBR. The legislature expressed a preference to link performance to rates 5 years ago in enacting Public Act 20-5 as part of Connecticut Statute 1619AB, which currently requires that PURA evaluate performance-based rate-making proposals in electric distribution company rate case proceedings. In that vein, we have made a good faith effort to present a performance-based rate-making framework that will inure to the benefit of our customers and produce the benefits that PBR promises. We have presented that proposal consistent with the framework that we presented in the electric companion proceeding that's been going on over the last 4 years. It's also consistent with the PBR framework that exists in Massachusetts and is consistent with the performance-based rate-making proposal that our electric sister company affiliate in New Hampshire has proposed, currently pending before the proceeding or before the PUC in New Hampshire. I feel passionately that performance-based rate-making is an appropriate framework for our customers, and I'm disappointed that in this proceeding, PURA has not evaluated the performance-based rate-making to any extent. Of the over 1,300 questions that have been issued as part of this proceeding and the due diligence process, 0 have been focused on the performance-based rate-making framework. And so I'm concerned that it seems evident that PBR will not be adopted as an outcome of this proceeding to the benefit of our customers, foregoing and prolonging the benefit for presumably a number of years until performance-based rate-making could be implemented in a valid and structured way here in Connecticut. Our concern is that without performance-based rate-making, we're likely to have to enter into a series of successive rate cases, especially if rate cases and if this rate case outcome is consistent with rate case orders issued of other utilities in the state of Connecticut recently. We see the value of performance-based rate-making as providing transparency, accountability, rate stability for our customers, and holding us accountable to providing incremental gains in reliability, performance, and safety performance for our customers. In the absence of that, our concern is that customers will experience rate changes that are significant and will lose the opportunity to have rates aligning with our costs and to have rates aligning with the performance of the service that we're providing for our customers.
Ms. Freyer, do you have anything to add on why PBR can and should be approved for Yankee in this proceeding?
I'll add three considerations from a practitioner's point of view. First, as we described in our testimony, in our written testimony, PBR as a concept is not novel. We've got decades of experience across the United States and elsewhere around the world with performance-based rate making. There are many flavors of it, but there is definitely a ground of experience to stand on, including for gas distribution businesses. Moreover, the model that Yankee Gas is proposing of PBR, a formula-based form of PBR, is very well tested and well established, successfully implemented in other jurisdictions. Secondly, there is precedent for single utilities or a group of utilities moving forward with PBR rate design before universal rollout of PBR in other jurisdictions. And that's been done successfully and to the benefit of those utilities' customers. And finally, I recognize and I appreciate that whenever there is something that's novel or new, our initial very much instinctive response is to be questioning, suspicious, maybe even a little bit of fear mixed in there. But innovation delivers improvements, benefits. And so if we let that suspicion win out, then there won't be those benefits. So there's in other words, what I'd like to say is that there's a consequence of not doing it. And that consequence is a deferral of those benefits that needs to also be part of the equation of decision-making when deciding about moving forward with PBR.
Ms. Freyer, could you please briefly describe the key components of Yankee's PBR plan?
Yankee Gas's PBR plan has 5 elements, very broadly speaking. The first element, and I just mentioned it a few minutes ago, is the formula-based approach to adjusting revenues from year to year. We colloquially refer to it as an I minus X formula. And that's coupled with a stay out provision, a term for the PBR, where the company commits not to proceed with additional rate cases. That formula-based approach allows for gradual changes in rates, revenues over time, and importantly, coupled with a stay out provision, creates very strong incentives on the utility to look for operational efficiency improvements. Now, that doesn't mean that cost of service is ignored. It's not ignored because the cast-off rates must still follow cost of service principles. But over the term of the PBR plan, there is no longer a need to go through line item by line item the costs and review those as one would in a rate case. The second element of the PBR plan is the performance metrics. And those are a very important complement. Again, there's a harmony to the PBR plan, a complement to the revenue cap formula. They allow for the tracking, the issuance of rewards or penalties for performance of the company. And that's the key component that really reflects the legislative intent that Doug just mentioned, the idea of linking performance with rates. The third element is the earnings sharing mechanism, which allows for the sharing of financial benefits when there is outperformance, when performance improves with customers. That's, again, a very important component because it allows customers to start enjoying those benefits of performance-based rate making over the term of the plan itself. Then the fourth element, the capital funding mechanism, that consists of a concept called the K-bar. There's also a capital tracker for a very particular form of capital programs, the DIMP. But the K-bar, again, is designed to align with the revenue cap formula and meet the very basic regulatory principles of providing funding for the necessary capital investment. And the final component is the consumer dividend. Again, it's another element of the plan that allows customers to benefit during the term of the plan alongside the company. And it will be triggered under certain market conditions when inflationary conditions in the economy exceed a certain level. So those are the 5 elements.
And do you have any additional comments on the strengths of the PBR plan, including benefits to customers?
So again, I'll put on my practitioner hat, and I think it's important to understand the strengths of the plan in the context of kind of the theoretical birth of the idea for performance-based rate making. And the roots really date back to the premise or recognition that there are certain services, utility services from a gas distribution company being one of them, that have to be regulated. But we want regulation to take on the best features of competitive markets. And in competitive markets, one of the most basic features is that each firm is driven, incentivized to seek out productivity improvements, seek out technology improvements, so it can maintain its advantage or its competitive position in the market, compete with other firms in the same industry. So the initial designers of PBR wanted to take that type of incentive and bring it forth into regulation. And therefore, the formula-based approach, the I-X approach to limiting the change in revenues or the revenue cap from year to year, bring over those same properties. We have an inflation factor that allows rates to move with inflationary pressures economy-wide, but it also importantly has a productivity target, an industry productivity target that ensures that the company is incentivized to keep pace with productivity trends in the industry. And that concept is the one that drives the utility to look for cost efficiencies and to implement those. And that's one of the major benefits of PBR. The PBR plan that Yankee Gas has produced has that revenue cap, has that formula. In addition, it has other mechanisms. I mentioned the ESM mechanism that allows also for customers to benefit during the PBR plan. The PBR plan has, going back again, performance metrics that allows customers during the PBR plan not just to get the financial benefits, those a portion of the operational efficiency gains that are produced, but also the performance benefits to continue to have the service quality that are reflected in the performance metrics, or even better service qualities because of the incentives with the performance incentive mechanism. I think also in time, over time, PBR produces other series of benefits. For example, there will be fewer rate cases under the performance-based rate plan that Yankee Gas proposed because of the stay-out provision. And that means reduced regulatory burden, not just for the company, but for interveners, for PURA. And those lower administrative costs ultimately mean efficiencies and lower costs for customers. And then also over time, the way that the revenue cap works, it produces gradual rate adjustments year after year. So customers will be shielded from the more common, I'll call them rate shock adjustments that happen when the company doesn't see rates going up, has a rate freeze, and then has to come in with a rate case. And we see through the cost of service analysis, rates rising thereafter. So that gradual rate increase is also an important benefit to customers, as we understand that's something that many customers in Connecticut would prefer over the current status quo. And finally, of course, with time, once the PBR plan is complete and the company comes in to reset its cast-off rates for the next regulatory cycle, because of those operational efficiency gains, because of the cost containment incentives, the cost to service at that time will be lower than it would have otherwise been. So again, another benefit to customers in the longer term.
Thank you. Mr. Kruger, could you please describe the PBR metrics Yankee has proposed to drive performance improvements under the PBR plan?
Yes, thank you. Yankee's proposed PBR metrics are aligned with the company's goals and safety, reliability, environmental stability, and customer service, and several of PURE's policy objectives. They're also aligned with the PBR and SQI measures we have in place with our sister companies in Massachusetts. These metrics will allow PURE and other stakeholders to monitor the company's progress across several of the initiatives during the term of the proposed PBR plan. The metrics will track the company's achievement in safety, reliability, customer service, emission reduction, and will provide transparency in relation to the company's performance in each of these areas. Yankee's proposing 2 scorecard metrics, one of which will be total damages per 1,000 dig-safe tickets, CBYD tickets, and a number of justified complaints per 10,000 customers. Yankee's also proposing 5 performance incentive metrics, which have financial incentives or penalties associated to each. These metrics include emergency response rates during normal hours, an emergency response rate after hours, which are in line with PURE docket 20-02-19 for leak response times, digital engagement, average speed of answer for gas emergency calls, and methane emission reductions.
Thank you. And what is the total potential financial impact of the performance incentive metrics?
Under the proposed PBR plan, we're subject to up to $3 million in potential penalties, as well as the opportunity to earn up to $2 million in incentives.
Thank you. The panel is available for cross-examination.
Thank you. We'll begin cross this morning with the OCC, please.
Good morning, commissioners, and to the panel. Claire Coleman, Consumer Counsel with Office of Consumer Counsel. I'm going to start us off today just with a couple bigger picture questions focused on the metrics and scorecard component, or metrics and PIM component of the PBR proposal, which, as Ms. Freyer recognized, are the key components that link performance to rates. I guess just a reaction and question to the testimony we just heard. Is it fair to state from Ms. Freyer and Mr. Horton your prior comments about the importance of linking performance to rates and the legislative support for that the company would support adopting proposed metrics and PIMs, irrespective of whether any other component of the PBR plan was adopted?
That's a great question. I think the answer, well, I don't think. The answer to that is no. We support the adoption of a comprehensive performance-based rate-making framework. There are several key components of it. Certainly, tying performance to rates is a key outcome of performance-based rate-making and a goal. And that does entail metrics that both have a direct tie to performance, financial performance of the utility, as well as additional reporting and scorecard metrics that don't necessarily have a direct tie. We believe that's all a necessary component. But a foundational element that has to be part of any performance-based rate-making component or framework is one that has rates designed in a way that both track with the utility's expectations of costs over the performance-based rate-making term, which is where the financial elements in terms of the I-X, the K-bar, the other critical components that are outside of the straight adoption of metrics has to be implemented as well. Otherwise, it can't work. We can't have an expectation that performance is improving in certain areas or changing in certain areas, which in my mind is a fundamental goal of PBR, to have something change. We can't go into a PBR framework with an expectation that something will change as compared to status quo or historical activities, but not then provide the financial resources for the utility to make those changes, to invest in people, processes, and technologies. That's where it becomes paramount that, and this is wholly consistent with our comments over the last 4 years in the ongoing performance-based rate-making docket, that rates need to be designed in a way to reflect the costs of service that the utility is providing. Otherwise, a utility won't be able to make a commitment to forego a rate case filing, which is another element of performance, which is that, yes, the metrics are critical, but the basic framework of how the rates change over the course of the PBR term is also a performance element, because if designed properly such that that framework is having rates change on an annual basis, in line with the expectation of an efficiently performing utility company, then the performance element becomes at the core of the utility and how it makes financial decisions. So that, as Ms. Freyer said in our opening remarks, that at the end of the day, customers benefit from the fact that the utility is incentivized to control costs, which inures to the benefit of customers. So it isn't just the metrics, the PIMs, that ties rates to performance. It's the comprehensive framework in its entirety that really needs to be designed in a way to link together. Otherwise, it just won't work. And Ms. Freyer, please.
I don't think I have anything else to add other than the word harmonization. I mentioned it a few times in my testimony on pages 21 and 22. I think harmonization is a prerequisite of a successful PBR plan. And so, to Doug's point, if the different elements aren't harmonized, we're not going to have success.
So just to recap and focus in on the first answer to my question, Mr. Horton, when you said no, the company would not support adopting proposed metrics and PIMs, that would include, for example, if the authority was to determine that a single year rate plan was appropriate, the company would not support the adoption of any metrics or performance incentive mechanisms?
That's correct. We have in our filing laid out, a proposal that, again, we feel is in a good faith effort to be able to deliver the value and benefits of PBR to our customers. We also talked about, as Ms. Freyer just said, it needs to be harmonized, not just in terms of the comprehensive elements of a PBR framework, but in the design and level of cast-off rates that are established in this proceeding, both of which we have no idea how PURA will reach an outcome to allow us to be able to make a commitment to stay out and embrace a performance-based rate-making plan or not. So we described in our initial testimony how after we receive the order, only then will we be able to make that commitment. And that would be a comprehensive commitment, meaning a commitment for us to embrace PBR and to avoid a rate case filing and to be subject to those penalties for the duration of the PBR term. But we can't do that without knowing that we're going to be able to meet the objectives and to avoid a rate case. If it's a single year plan, then no, we wouldn't be adopting performance-based rate making, and we wouldn't be voluntarily agreeing to those performance incentive mechanisms, penalty or incentive.
Okay, so putting aside the PIMs, what about scorecards, for example? Those don't have any impact on the company's revenues. Would the company still oppose adopting scorecards or metrics to allow for improved tracking of performance?
We are all about finding ways to have better transparency for our customers, and I'm sure that PURA could order us to implement tracking metrics or scorecards in the absence of a full PBR. So that could be an outcome. I think, in my mind, our objective is to try to get to a place where we have PBR as a comprehensive framework in place for our customers. So while that could be an outcome, that PURA orders us to start tracking and reporting on additional metrics, and I do see that having some value in terms of transparency, I think it's falling far short of the value that a comprehensive PBR framework, if adopted by PURA, could deliver for our customers.
Thank you. And then transitioning to some of the specific metrics and PIMs proposed by the company, this may be appropriately directed to Mr. Kruger, who summarized the metrics and PIMs being proposed. I was wondering if any of Eversource's other gas affiliates utilize any of the proposed metrics and PIMs being proposed here?
We do. We do. Both EGMA and NSTAR have PBR and SQI measures in place in Massachusetts. Similar metrics are in place.
Which one was it? Sorry.
EGMA and NSTAR, both in Massachusetts.
And which specific metrics are you referring to?
Damages, emergency response. So that would tie into the after hours and normal hours emergency response. So we do have in place similar metrics in Massachusetts.
And are those designed as scorecards or PIMS?
They are SQI, which is tied to
If I,
penalty. That I'll let Doug speak to. He's closer to the SQI measure.
but Mr. Kruger was right. There is existing service quality penalty legislation, I believe, in place that the utilities in Massachusetts are subject to. So as part of the performance-based rate-making framework that exists in Massachusetts, really the performance element is what I mentioned in that it has the fundamental rate design is one that incentivizes the financial performance of the utility to be in line with customer interests. The PIMS, or excuse me, the metrics that we report under PBR don't have associated with them a direct financial penalty or incentive, but there is penalty exposure that exists under, existing legislation to ensure that we're maintaining quality of service in certain areas.
Chair, may I ask for a late file exhibit providing information on the specific metrics and PIMS that are already implemented by Yankee Gas affiliates or under the Eversource umbrella, the ones that overlap with those being proposed here in this proceeding?
Yes, that is late file exhibit 128.
Great, thank you. And for any of those that are designed as a performance incentive, has the company ever paid a performance incentive been paid a performance incentive related to any of the PIMS that were just referenced?
I must not have been clear. There isn't in the existing framework in Massachusetts, the metrics that we report don't result in a direct incentive for any of them. The metrics are reported for transparency and accountability, and there is certain overlap with existing service quality statute.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Certainly.
And how did the company go about determining that the metrics and PIMS proposed in this application were those that would benefit Yankee customers the most?
I can start and I'll look to the panelists to fill in because as you pointed out that others are much closer to the metrics. Again, we started with the notion that we want to have performance-based rate making in place for the reasons that I said to benefit our customers and to have stability and accountability and transparency over time. And then we evaluated metrics that we feel in a number of areas would ensure that we're both maintaining a quality and level of service that customers are currently experiencing and protecting them in the event under a performance-based rate making framework, protecting them from an outcome that could have service quality deteriorating beyond a certain level. And we tried as a collective to evaluate where those metrics would be and how we could fashion them in a way that would achieve those objectives, but the specifics.
Thank you. I'll add that under these, the performance elements are really tied to safety and customer satisfaction. So when you look at the three categories we are proposing, safety reliability being one, two is the customer satisfaction and engagement, and three being methane emission reduction. Really, when you look at the safety reliability, it's emergency response, ensuring that we're there in a timely fashion as set out by PURA in that docket I referenced earlier, as well as looking at damage prevention and making sure we're mindful of that. We're top quartile in that for damage prevention for tickets per 1,000 or damages per 1,000 tickets. And then, at our forefront is customer satisfaction. So ensuring in that category, Mr. Lawrence can touch on that a little bit. And then Ms. Day definitely has quite a bit to talk about with the environmental sustainability with the methane emission reduction. So when we're choosing these categories, it's overall performance and looking at safety and the benefit of the customer satisfaction that we would receive by all of these categories.
I would like to add, and I have some additional information that I can put into the record in case it's helpful, but the other thing that we were looking at when we were developing these metrics is we wanted to make sure that they were measurable and how they were measured were also transparent so that all of our customers would be able to understand where those numbers come from and what they mean. So we did definitely try to explain that within our initial testimony as well. But I was able to pull up the scorecard metrics that we have for NSTAR. So if it's helpful, I can provide those now. So the ones that overlap are the emergency response rate within 45 minutes, the total damages per 1,000 tickets, and
I don't think that's in there.
and those are the two that overlap. But again, we can still provide that as a late filed exhibit so that it's easier for you to reference.
Okay, if you could add that to the late file exhibit previously requested, that
Absolutely.
automatically.
And Ms. Coleman, if I could add just a couple more comments on the customer satisfaction, customer service side. So first of all, on the digital engagement piece, the reason that we're proposing that is because that speaks to the efficiency of our investments in improving our digital engagement channels with our customers. I testified earlier about how we have a robust and consistent investment plan to improve that customer experience. And this is the way that customers essentially vote with their clicks to demonstrate that they're finding those channels to be satisfactory and that they return to them for additional transactions. On the gas emergency call average speed of answer, obviously providing a response to a critical safety incident is a continuum that starts with that first customer contact. And so the gas emergency average speed of answer ensures that that first contact is handled efficiently as possible. And then the third piece on the number of justified complaints, obviously this has been a topic between a number of stakeholders, and we're proposing that as a scorecard to build a collaborative process for us to work with EO, EOCC, and other stakeholders to understand what are the drivers across the board of the high volume of complaints, and for us to take direct accountability for those that are justified, meaning that we solely own the root causes associated with those.
Thank you. And I'm not sure who on the panel to direct this to, but given the priority areas just referenced, did the company consider any metrics, scorecards, or PIMs that focus on cost containment? For example, Central Hudson Gas and Electric Corporation in New York has a gas efficiency shared saving mechanism designed to promote unit cost reductions for the company's gas efficiency portfolio. Another example, in Maryland, there's a gas procurement incentive mechanism designed to minimize gas procurement expenses by comparing the utility's actual spot gas purchase prices with market indices, and evaluate shared incremental savings between customers and shareholders. Did the company consider either of those types of performance incentive mechanisms?
Thank you. I can start and Ms. Freyer can supplement. And that gets back to my initial response to your first question in terms of having to have the performance-based rate-making framework be designed comprehensively and implemented comprehensively, meaning from the design of the cast-off rate to the design of the annual changes that are designed in a way to track with the utilities costs. So in a general sense, performance-based rate-making has annual changes has rates changing based on an I minus X formula. The result of that formula essentially has rates changing for the utility at a trend and pace aligned with an average industry performer, so that the utility is incentivized to control costs while maintaining a level of service under the average pace of cost trends over time. So that's where the performance element comes in from a cost efficiency standpoint and a rate stability standpoint, and ensuring that rates are tied directly with performance. That's a fundamental premise of implementing PBR, and that's in my opinion how the customer is assured to have that the utility is assured to have accountability to its customers for maintaining cost performance over the pendency of the plan. There's also an earnings sharing component that is one way only. If we earn more than our authorized return on equity, earnings would be shared with customers 50-50. There's also a cost containment element as a foundational component of our proposed KBAR mechanism, such that if capital expenditures exceed our forecast as of this point in time, only an amount up to 10% above the amount that we forecasted here would be allowed to flow through the KBAR mechanism during the pendency of the plan. And Ms. Freyer can speak, I think, to some of the specific metrics that you've mentioned.
Right, so just to focus in on my question, which is, did the company consider specific PIMs, specifically a gas procurement incentive mechanism that could be designed to minimize gas procurement expenses? Can just clarify yes or no if you could.
No, my answer to that was no, we didn't consider those incremental mechanisms that you tagged in your question for the reasons that I said.
Thank you for
Certainly.
clarifying that. And then with respect to one of the areas of focus you identified, which was greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the PIM proposed by the company is associated with reductions to gas leaks. But I was wondering if the company considered any broader greenhouse gas reduction metrics that would be designed to achieve company-wide greenhouse gas emission reductions as a whole.
So I believe some of my colleagues in prior panels have spoken more about sort of the Eversource parent company initiatives towards greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So for this, we were really trying to focus on the gas company, right, and what the gas company can do. And when we normally calculate our emissions, how we calculate those emissions is based on established factors that are based on materials and the lengths of the pipelines that we have of those materials in our system, the number of cast iron services, the mileage of mains associated, or the mileage of cast iron mains. And so we have inventories of those different materials, and then there are emissions factors associated with those different materials, and that's how we normally calculate our emissions. Part of the reason why that is across the industry is that it's very hard to calculate the emissions associated with specific leaks, because it's one of those things that changes over time based on soil conditions, based on the time of year that it is. Lots of different factors go into that. And so that's why industry-wide, you kind of have this annual emissions factor associated with the inventory that's based on studies that have been done, kind of calculating this across the industry, right? So we were really trying to think, well, we already have this obligation to get rid of our bare steel and cast iron and our other leak-prone pipe, and that's ARP, and it's doing a great job, and it's really reducing emissions, right? So we were trying to think about, well, what can we do that's additional to that may not necessarily already be reflective of work that we're already doing, because we're trying to figure out what we can do to provide additional benefit that would really drive us to change our operations so that we're providing some incremental benefit. And what we recognized we could do was really look at the grade 3 SEI leaks, which are the grade 3 leaks with significant environmental impact. And we developed kind of an illustrative emission factor associated with those leaks and calculated that. And then our idea is that if we devote additional effort towards reducing that population of leaks, even though that's not necessarily reflected in the emissions factor or the emissions that we normally calculate, we do believe that by repairing those leaks faster, we have a associated emissions reduction. And so that's what we were trying to illustrate with that specific metric.
And if I could just add briefly, I think it's germane to your question, Consumer Counsel Coleman, in terms of having the design of our metrics. I think we've tried to apply consistent principles to how we would design those metrics. And there's 3 criteria generally that we've applied: things that are within our control, things that are objectively measurable, and things that has a specific bench line or performance target. So if there are elements that, and I thought your question was on sort of emissions reductions more globally as opposed to things that Yankee Gas can control, that would not meet that. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was your question.
Our company-wide greenhouse gas reductions beyond the strategy of controlling leaks.
Got it. I'm sorry.
So just to follow up, Ms. Day, on your comments, with the proposed GHG reduction, PIM currently proposed capture scope 2 and scope 3 emissions?
My understanding of scope 3 emissions is that those are associated with the customer, right? So this is really just leaks on our system. So again, subject to check, right? I believe this would be a scope 2 emission. I don't believe it would be included in that reporting because, as I mentioned, kind of the industry standard for how we perform that calculation is based solely on inventory. So although it would not be reflected in that calculation, we believe that just based on our knowledge of the fact that leaks emit methane, that it is an appropriate metric for us to target because, again, although it's not necessarily reflected in those inventory-based methods that we use to have consistent reporting kind of across the industry in terms of the methane emissions associated with gas distribution companies, we believe that by repairing those grade 3 leaks with significant environmental impact faster, we would be reducing emissions. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you. And then along the same lines, so, sorry, calendar popped up. Another incentive I looked at was Central Hudson Gas and Electric Corporation in New York also has a shared savings incentive for non-pipes alternatives. They structure it as an incentive designed to incentivize Central Hudson to deploy a portfolio of NPA projects to avoid investment in new gas infrastructure, and they measure it based on the net benefits, which is specifically measured as a difference in the net present value of the NPA project and the traditional infrastructure project it would defer or replace. Did the company consider recommending or supporting the adoption of any similar shared savings PIM at Yankee?
We have not, specific to affordability in mind. We're considerate of any alternative to scale that is affordable for the customers. So that's one of the factors, as well as the uncertainty of customer adoption that would severely impact our ability to deploy an NPA.
Thank you. So I mentioned a couple examples, but I'm just curious more broadly, did the company evaluate any metrics or scorecards that are currently in place in other jurisdictions in the process of determining the appropriate set to propose in its application?
Just to clarify, your question is if we just generally evaluated other metrics that are in place in other jurisdictions when we landed on those that we proposed here?
Right.
I'm not sure if other panelists can speak to that better than I.
Ms. Coleman, I can speak to the fact that I'm the member of several industry group chief customer officer consortiums where we informally discuss the way that we conduct business in each of our jurisdictions across the country. And so we compare notes regularly on an informal level, but did not document any specific studies on the customer side regarding metrics.
Okay. And when preparing the application today, you didn't present any alternatives that came from other jurisdictions in terms of metrics and scorecards that were presented in your
Correct. We did not
application?
present any alternatives that came from any of my conversations, correct?
Thank you.
I would like to add that, we definitely tried to develop metrics based on our understanding of what our customers in Connecticut want and also, the policy objectives of the state of Connecticut. So I think when we were looking at our metrics, we were focused on our work here in Connecticut.
Thank you. I think I'm all set with my questions. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who I think have some specific questions about the metrics and PIMs, and I believe Attorney Talbert Slagle is going next.
Sure. Hi, James Talbert Slagle with the Office of Consumer Counsel. I'm going to start off with the digital engagement PIM. Just wondering, how does that digital engagement PIM better serve customers?
Thank you, Attorney Talbot Slagle, for that question. It's an objective way to measure whether customers are essentially embracing and using the channels that we are consistently investing in to enhance. As you know, just generally in this increasingly digital economy, customers' expectations on the efficacy and the efficiency of digital channels is constantly increasing. And so we feel that we need to keep up. And so every year we're investing across the company as a whole several $1 million to make sure that our digital channels are meeting customer expectations. And so we proposed this metric to show that customers' utilization of those channels is indeed keeping pace and actually increasing over that period, to show the fact that our investments are effective in as objective a way as possible.
So it's just measuring the level of participation in those digital channels, and that's how, and you equate that with they're being served better, correct?
Yes, because as we consistently see, customer satisfaction amongst customers who are using digital channels is higher than those who are using phone channels. So we view, and it's supported by by just regular research, we view that digital channels are more satisfying, and therefore seeing increased utilization in our digital customer experiences equates to higher satisfaction.
Okay. So on page 36, basically at top level, Yankee would be afforded an incentive of $500,000 for each year in which it meets or exceeds the 93% adoption rate, correct? What actions does Yankee propose taking in order to reach that 93% level?
So as I testified at a high level, and I believe this is the subject of a late filing exhibit, we have an ongoing digital channel investment program. And so essentially executing on our continued investments in a way that drives additional additional utilization on the part of our customers would be the path to success in that particular measure.
I'm sorry, did you list specific things that you're going to do? I didn't.
That's the subject of a late file exhibit that we'll be providing. Did I list things that we're going to do? I cannot speak to our specific investment priorities moving forward over the horizon. I can just say that generally we execute on a digital enhancement plan that is essentially managed through our agile methodology on an annual basis. So I know that generally there will be a slate of digital enhancement investments, and then we will prioritize them based on a series of metrics.
Okay, and that's funded through the revenue requirement, so ratepayer funded?
That's correct. Dollars in equals services out.
Okay. But the PIM would go to shareholders, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so ratepayer funds in, shareholder PIM out.
Well, I think, and I see the direction of where you're going with it. I think the important thing to keep in mind with all of this is that, obviously our objective is to serve customers first and foremost. The purpose of the PIMs is to try to measure and improve the quality of service to customers. We need shareholders to provide us access to capital in order to invest in people, processes, and technologies in order to improve and to deliver the services that we need. And so I think at the end of the day, that is the paradigm. Shareholders are offering up their capital and taking the risks associated with doing that. They require a return on that capital in order for us to have access to it. And so incentives are a way to ensure that resources of the company are deployed in the best interest of customers.
Okay, so as the penetration of the electronic or the digital media increases, does the company propose reducing services that it provides via telephone or in person or via other means?
I would not use the word reduces. We would, of course, make those non-digital channels continue to be available because they are the channel of choice for a subset of our customers. But our goal is over time to continuously make our digital channels more and more attractive to customers so that they elect those that provide more efficient self-service and are more satisfying. So those other channels will still be available. We just hope that customers will shift their focus more toward the digital channels that are the subject of these investments.
Okay, thank you. So the response on page 34, lines 13 through 16, discusses how the 91% forecasted target and this is a quote, builds on the observed historical growth rate while recognizing that further gains will slow, and notes that it reflects the principle of diminishing returns. Does the company have data to support that theory of the diminishing returns with respect to digital adoption?
I think if it's okay, I'd like to take a late file on that. I think it's something that we consistently talk about qualitatively, but I will need to check with my voice of the customer research team to see if they can substantiate the theory. Yep.
That's fine. We can get a late file on that.
Yep.
That'll be late file exhibit 129. And Attorney Talbot-Slago, if you wouldn't mind summarizing for me, please.
Basically, well, based on their testimony at page 34, lines 13 through 16, it discusses the principle of diminishing returns related to adoption of these digital options for customer interaction. So they are offering to provide the data to back up that claim.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think a lot of my questions that are related to that kind of diminishing return theory. So maybe I'll hold those for the late file hearing once we have that underlying data. So I think I'm done for right now. Thank you.
Hi, Tom Wheel, Office of Consumer Counsel, like the rest of us. I had a quick follow-up to Mr. Kruger's response to Consumer Counsel Coleman's question about the non-pipes alternative PIM. I think you mentioned that there would potentially be like affordability and customer adoption concerns. Is that what you said?
I did.
Would those concerns not extend to the network geothermal pilot project that's being proposed by the Clean Technology Panel in this case?
I'm not the expert on that testimony. However, I do know affordability is at the top of mind of our decisions we're making in regards to NPA, non-pipe alternatives.
Okay.
I guess I would add, and again, also not necessarily the expert here, but I think that's part of why, we're for that pilot or for that approach, kind of our first step is understanding if, PURA and the state of Connecticut are interested in such an approach, because we would require some type of support to understand how those costs should be allocated and what the impact to customers should be. I think that kind of need on our part for policy and regulatory support and direction also applies more broadly to NPAs. How do those costs get allocated to what customers and at what time?
Thanks. I have some questions about the safety and reliability scorecard that's discussed on page 17 of the metrics testimony. Let me go there myself. I guess the first question is it the company's position that its enforcement of the call before you dig requirements need to be improved from the current performance?
So I do want to note that this metric specifically is a scorecard metric. Part of the reason why we identified it as a scorecard metric is because there are some parts of excavation damages that are outside of our control, right? So one of the main mitigations that we have for excavation damages is, as you noted, call before you dig. Some people don't call, right? So that's part of the problem, is that there may not be a ticket for us to even be aware of excavation that's going to happen. But my colleague, Ms. Cousino, is here because she can really speak to a lot of the work that we do to reach excavators so that they're aware of the program. And then beyond that, the other work that we do. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Cousino.
Thank you. And if you could just repeat that question, please.
Yeah, the question was just whether the company expects that its enforcement of the call before you dig requirements needs to be improved.
Needs to be improved.
Yes.
So what I would say is, and I think, they spoke a little, Mr. Kruger spoke earlier, right now, our company is already an industry leader, as was mentioned, performing better than 90% of other gas companies. So I would say our no notice tickets, one enhancements that we've been looking at, because when you are executing at that high level and trying to figure out additional outreach for those type of activities that are outside of our control, we do believe that, through the spirit of continuous improvement, one addition that we added was for expiring tickets. We have an automated message now going out to excavators to say, if you've completed your excavation, thank you. If not, really that reminder for the expiring ticket, just to give awareness to, any excavators that are doing that work. So I do think that that is something that we look at as a whole for additional excavator outreach and public awareness for the program.
And I would just like to note, I really liked Ms. Cousino's comment on continuous improvement. This is a safety-related metric. And so I think that's why we believe it's important for, our customers in the state of Connecticut to have visibility on how we're doing. And that's why we believe it's important to devote continuous effort towards improving that, because it is ultimately a public safety concern. And so that's why we believe it's important to continue to improve and ideally drive it down to zero is what our ultimate goal is.
Thank you. On page 18 of that same testimony, there's a table 1. Do you know why the damages per 1,000 tickets were so much, notably higher in 2020 than in the next 3 years?
Again, I think I would need to look at the individual details. That year, we did see an uptick and an increase. I'd have to look at the individual tickets that went into that, to better be able to answer that question.
Okay, that's okay. The proposed target of 1.14 is higher than the actual performance in 21, 22, and 23. Is the company expecting a decline in performance in the future?
No, again, I think what we, just mentioned was more around those activities outside our control. So when we look at all of those factors and the continued education for our internal employees, the manager of damage prevention, he's actually the president of Call Before You Dig. He brings a lot of those best practices back to our internal employees, as well as excavator outreach that we're doing at, external events. One item I would say that we have seen an increased improvement in, and we continue to really monitor for, you have your total damages and then you have your at fault. Another item that we have really paid special attention to as we continue to replace aging older infrastructure, and we have new pipe going into the ground, that also comes with new records. So therefore, we would have that improved records, which ultimately helps us to improve as we're doing our markouts. So we're really looking at any options outside of your normal, just because, again, when you get to that higher level, really, what are some additional things that we can do to try to educate the communities, as well as, our internal employees and contract partners.
I also want to add, so 2020, right, was a COVID year. So an important part of this metric in particular, and understanding how it's calculated, the denominator is the total number of tickets. And then the numerator, right, is the number of damages. And as we previously mentioned, sometimes those damages are from people who do not submit tickets. So in 2020, we kind of saw less construction from the people who are normally performing construction and are therefore familiar with how the Call Before You Dig kind of system works. And so I think when we were thinking about what do we really want to commit to for the next 4 years, what do we want people to understand about this metric for the next 4 years, we were really thinking about, there are things that can happen like COVID that are outside of our control. And when would there be a change that really reflected a degradation in performance? So this target that we picked still keeps us in that top decile. And again, as I just mentioned, there are things that are outside of our performance, and we were really trying to take it very seriously that we can't necessarily control those factors over the next 4 years. And so that was part of what went into our determination of that specific target.
Thanks. And that's sort of what I was getting at. And now I'm a little even more confused because I saw in the testimony the justification for the 5% deviation of the average being for situations outside of your control, but that's a 5% deviation of the average of 1.09, which already takes into account the 1.24 for COVID. So isn't that already measuring for situations outside of your control as the baseline? Like, why are you adding a 5% deviation from the average where if the average includes data that's outside of the company's control already?
One moment, please.
Right. So I think part of what also went into this is that part of the goal, especially for these scorecard metrics, is transparency. And I think the idea is that we would expect that those interested customers and stakeholders would be able to look at all of the metrics at the same time. Many of the metrics are based on a 4-year average because we're kind of looking at the past 4 years because we're committing to a 4-year stay out period. I think that's kind of like the fundamental expectation there. And then really, when we were looking at that deviation from the average, as I mentioned before, what really went into that consideration is maintaining that top decile performance. So I think as we've previously mentioned, we are performing better on this metric than 90% of the gas companies based on this 2023 data. And so when we were looking at that target based on that 4-year average, which as you noted, did include a COVID year, that was really what we were looking at for this scorecard metric. So I definitely recognize your point, but I think on the balance where we ultimately tried to land with that target was maintaining that high level of performance.
Thanks. In the context of a scorecard, why is it important to set the target to account for the level of the company's control?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. In the context of a scorecard where there is no penalty or reward, where the company isn't being financially incentivized, where my understanding of the scorecard is just that it's a data set with a target set to kind of understand, to give some directionality to the data. Why is it important to account for the level of the company's control and essentially exclude elements that are outside of the company's control in the setting of the target?
And I can start, and then Ms. Day can please supplement. I think it's a good question. I think in terms of the REO2 docket, this has come up there as well. Our perspective is that whether it's a metric, meaning it's just doesn't have a benchmark or a target, it's just a metric, and that or a scorecard or a PIM, our perspective is that anything that we're reporting under a performance-based rate-making framework should have those 3 elements to it, or at least 2 of them, inside our control and objectively measured. The third criteria of having a benchmark or a target is something that we think is only necessarily applicable for things that are scorecards, PIMs. Our perspective is that the purpose of reporting on all of these things is not just to report for the sake of reporting, of course, but to report because we're trying to align some objective or outcome for our customers. So there could be, in our view, the ideal would be that you start with something that just is a metric. We don't have a benchmark or a target, but it's aspirational potentially to have a benchmark or a target someday. Same with a scorecard. A scorecard, we have the data, it's within our control, but we don't yet know what it should be a metric that we want to establish to tie to a direct financial penalty or incentive. And then PIM is the highest bar, which has a direct financial tie. But in our view, all of them should meet at least those first two criteria for things that are within our control and objectively measurable, so that we're not just reporting things for the sake of reporting.
Okay. My last question on this proposed scorecard. I think Ms. Day and maybe others have mentioned the relationship, the first quartile results and the relationship of the company's performance as compared to nationwide performance. And I saw the figure 1 on page 20. I guess getting back to the question of the target, why isn't the target based on a benchmark? Like, why isn't it a comparative benchmark-based target? And being that it isn't, why is the data from other companies relevant?
I can start. First off, most importantly, that each one of these operators likely has different assets in the ground. So a portion of some of these damages could be attributed to aging infrastructure, such as noted that New England has, and Yankee Gas has a higher proportion of leak-prone aging infrastructure in their system. And that's one factor. So when we consider benchmarking across the industry, specific to other utilities who may not have like-for-like assets in the ground, that was a consideration we made, as well as when we measure ourselves. We have true data of our system and how we operate. So we thought that was a very good reflection of our performance over the past 4 years.
I'd also like to add, because I think it is a good question. I think we're really, I guess from my perspective, we were really trying to develop metrics, I think especially for the scorecards, that would be understandable to our customers. I think there is an element of, if we were to provide our kind of percentage performance across the different utilities, I think there is an element of that where it doesn't necessarily track our performance against ourselves either. It also, I think, would be a less tangible number, right? Because it's just a little bit farther divorced from the actual number of damages. So definitely I take your point, and it certainly is an interesting model to think about for how that scorecard metric could have been developed. But again, I think especially for the scorecards, we were trying to make it understandable for the customers who might be interested in that aspect of our performance.
And just two brief things to add. I'm not as close to the data, but I think I could say that in some cases that could result in a less demanding target. This may be one of them if we were to measure ourselves against our peers. But also, even if it didn't, because I do think that measuring against peers is something we all try to do. It's important to look at in any aspect of our business. Well, are we doing a best practice, and how can we improve our current practices? But again, it gets back to my opening statement around the need to have it be a comprehensively designed framework. Let's imagine that this or any of our metrics we're proposing to track it against our own performance, but when we do a comparison to other utilities and we find that our performance is less than theirs. So that would require us to increase our performance to meet that benchmark. I think that is a noble goal in this hypothetical, likely one that we would share. But certainly, and again, this is a hypothetical, but I would expect that to be able to get ourselves up to that industry standard, whatever it might be, especially if we're comparing against, sister utilities who don't have the infrastructure at the age and condition that ours is. It's a newer system, whatever it might be. It will require a significant, potentially cost expenditure in people, processes, and technology. And so that's where I think the whole design, again, of a performance-based rate-making framework needs to be done comprehensively to say, okay, if we want to get to X level and we're at Y level that's significantly lower, it's going to cost customers whatever that is. And this is a metric that we're looking at. And again, already a top utility performer. Our objective here was to try to ensure that we're going to ensure and provide comfort for you all and for our customers that we're going to maintain that level of performance, accounting for the bands that Ms. Day testified to.
Thank you. So I guess, I mean, I understand the answer to the first question, which is why it's not a benchmark. Is the answer to the second question that the comparative data was provided just to provide assurance that the proposed target would still maintain comparative performance would still maintain top quartile performance? Is that the idea?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the customer satisfaction and engagement mechanism on page 20, so scorecard on page 21. My understanding from the testimony is that this would be limited to complaints that meet two criteria. First, that where the customer has first contacted Yankee and given the company a chance to address their issue. And secondly, where the company has objectively made an error. Is that correct?
That's correct.
For the first qualifier, how does the company determine whether the customer gave the company a chance to address the issue?
Are you asking specifically, how do we substantiate whether a first contact occurred?
Well, according to the testimony, and maybe it's just a matter of semantics.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting lost in the difference between the PDF page numbers and the labeled page numbers. The first bullet on page 21 says the customer must have first contacted Yankee and given the company a chance to address their issue.
Yes.
Are those two separate things, or is that just saying the customer must have first contacted Yankee?
Oh, no, those are joint. Yes.
I mean, I guess, so I'll ask my question maybe better. Is that a qualifier saying, A, the customer must have reached out first, and also B, part of like that interaction has to have included the customer giving us a chance to resolve the issue? Is that what that is?
Exactly, yes. So what we're trying to do there is differentiate between just a normal human performance error versus a situation where an issue was directly raised to the company's attention and we failed to resolve it. That's the point of that distinction.
But isn't that the second bullet there, that the company has objectively made an error? I guess.
I think I did bleed into the second as well, but I think the key point there, I think the point that you're trying to make, if I don't want to infer your intent, Attorney Wheel, though, is that the customer must have contacted us specifically about the issue that becomes the subject of the complaint. Like saying, I believe a mistake was made, or I feel like I need more help in this area.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I confer for just one moment?
Sure.
Thank you for that. I don't have anything to add.
Sure. What I was getting at wasn't like a trick question. What I was getting at is that it sounds like for the purposes of the scorecard, is there like some stage where there's some subjective judgment about like whether the company whether the customer gave the company enough of a chance. And my question is ultimately like, who
Oh,
made
yeah,
the
okay.
judgment? How do we, is that a data filter? Like, how practically would we get to that?
Yeah, yeah, okay, thank you. So thank you for clarifying that, Maya, because it's crystal clear in my mind the way this works. We keep records of all of our customer contacts. And so if there is a customer contact on that specific topic, that would satisfy that first criteria.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. And the second qualifier, my understanding is it maybe relates to something you've already discussed, Mr. Horton, is that the second qualifier being the subjective mistake by the company, is that intended to capture actions that are within the control of the company?
Just for clarity of the record, objectively, I know, but
Yes.
if we objectively made an error, I think it is that, but also I think it's more so that there's not some subjective dispute as to whether or not an error has been made. It's just that any reasonable person looking at the facts of the incident can see plainly that we have made an error.
Okay.
And if I may clarify, because this was actually a subject of some earlier questioning, what we envision here is not the company receives a complaint, makes a unilateral decision, and that's the end of it. We envision a collaborative process to establish the baseline, to look at complaints collectively with EOE and OCC, if you'd like to participate as well, to come to an understanding as to whether each complaint meets these criteria for a couple of reasons. The first of which is obviously we want to be accountable and transparent, because proposing this as a scorecard item, which could eventually evolve into a PIM, we want to make sure that there's a level of trust amongst everybody involved. Secondly, too, we really want to bring the human performance methodology to this particular dialogue here, meaning that every complaint, whether we're fully accountable for the root cause or whether it's state policy or whatever, is an opportunity for us collectively to improve our processes, practices, et cetera. And so the idea here is that we establish a regular dialogue to agree on which are the complaints that meet these criteria.
Thank you. Page 21, line 10 of the testimony explains that these criteria would help to exclude, quote, situations where a customer was dissatisfied with the accurate application of a policy, even if the company and EOE subsequently agreed to revise a decision because of extraordinary circumstances. From the company's perspective, is that kind of customer dissatisfaction not worthy of tracking?
I would say it is worthy of tracking, but not worthy of being a PBR scorecard item that could eventually evolve into a PIM.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it be the same? The testimony also explains that complaints stem from dissatisfaction with PURA approved and implemented policies. My understanding is that this would also kind of filter those out. Is that
Exactly
the same answer for that?
Yeah, and I would say that feeds back into that collaborative process we talked about. Again, we're not just looking to hone in only on the justified complaints and discard the others to the trash bin of history. We want to learn from every single complaint that is raised to EOE.
Line 18, page 21, line 18 of the testimony says that the proposed scorecard will show the company's commitment to customer service. Is it the company's view that its commitment to customer service doesn't extend to customer dissatisfaction that's driven by factors outside of the company's control?
Oh, no, we're wholly committed to that as well. But in terms of creating kind of scorecard accountability, that's the piece where, to Mr. Horton's comments, we want to specifically tie the PBR metrics to the areas of the highest control.
I guess I'm just a little confused, and I think like maybe this has been I don't want to like continue the conversation that's been happening in another docket, but I'm confused about is customer service the same thing as like resolving customer issues that are within the company's control, or does it extend beyond that to all customer interactions?
Oh, it certainly extends to all interactions. And I think, so for example, we have a robust voice of the customer program that has volumes of metrics, but we feel that the ones that are appropriate for us, specifically for a PBR scorecard metric, are that specific subset that are within the company's control. And in this case, it would be the justified complaints, the ones in which we were responsible for the root cause and failed to address it.
Thank you. On page 22 of the testimony, it discusses the establishment of that baseline from 2023 through 2025, but it also notes that the company hasn't previously tracked this data. I was confused by that. There's an interrogatory in this proceeding, EOE 21 that shows data from 2018 through 2024 that the company provided that shows a table of total complaints and total justified complaints. So hasn't the company been tracking this data since at least 2018?
What I would say is that, again, kind of going back to the collaborative consensus during the baseline period that we talked about, we want to make sure that we reach an agreeable consensus with EOE and any other stakeholders who want to be involved in that, who should be involved in that conversation, to make sure that the criteria that we're applying in a PBR setting are consistent. So while we're confident in the methodology we applied, it's important that EOE and OCC buy into that methodology as well.
Okay. Would you accept, I mean, you can open the EOE 21 if you want, but would you accept, subject to check, that what that shows is that the total complaints received from EOE since 2020 haven't exceeded 104 complaints per year?
Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Attorney Will, can you ask the question specifically again?
Sure. Would you agree that the total complaints received from the company, received by the company from EOE since 2020 haven't exceeded 104 complaints per year?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Do you know how that compares to the total number of service calls Yankee receives in a year?
I could read that in. I don't know that ratio off the top of my head. I apologize for that.
Okay. I don't think we need it as a read-in, but would you say that is it a comparable number? Does Yankee receive something like 100 calls to the company from customers in a year, or is it?
Oh goodness, no. We receive hundreds of thousands of calls. Generally order of magnitude speaking, the vast majority of those are, I would say, almost all of them are inquiries rather than complaints or escalations.
Does the company internally define complaint or escalation as only the calls received from EOE?
No.
So does it separately track complaints or escalations for the calls that it receives independently?
We track escalations and we track complaints from other channels other than EOE.
Does the company track any calls it receives directly as opposed to like being referred from some other channel as a complaint?
A typical inquiry is not a complaint. So I think that's why I'm struggling a little bit with your question. So the definition of a complaint kind of goes back to the criteria here. A complaint would be a situation where the company made an error and then failed to address it. And so the customer had to contact us again to complain about that point.
Okay, but can a complaint happen without, my confusion stems from your response that it can come from EOE or other sources. Can a complaint just be a customer calling without having contacted EOE or the AG's office or OCC or anywhere else and just call and say like, I have a complaint?
Well, I think a customer might, in their first contact, might call and have a complaint, and that complaint might stem from, a simple human performance error or a policy that we enforce accurately, but that they don't like. And in the customer's mind, they might use the word complaint, but we don't necessarily consider it a complaint. We consider that an inquiry because it is our goal to satisfy that customer on that first contact with every issue they had. And assuming that we do, then we would not consider that a complaint. I think that's why I'm struggling, because there's like there's the lowercase c definition of complaint, and then there's the capital C definition of complaint that we're proposing here.
Okay. Yes, then that's just what I'm trying to get at. So is the company's internal definition of complaint outside of the, dictionary definition of the word.
Yeah.
When a company refers to a complaint, does that require a referral from an outside source, other than the customer, in order to qualify as a complaint?
Yeah, what I would say is that we internally try not to refer to normal inquiries as complaints for that very reason, because complaint carries with it the connotation that we somehow did something wrong that requires us to bring in further attention to remediate the situation.
Okay. Thank you.
Attorney Wheel, I'd like to add something in. As part of the gas operation, where we do interface quite a bit with the customers with certain types of work that we perform, we do a subset of surveys that we send out to customers. And there are times that we do receive low satisfaction survey scores in, where we use those as lessons learned. So to answer your question, yes, there are areas that customers can reach out and get to the business with their low satisfaction score, and we investigate each and every single one of these. And I just wanted to add that for the record.
Thanks. And none of that would be tracked in this proposed scorecard. Is that correct?
This is separate, correct?
Thank you. The calculation on page 22 of the testimony indicates that you propose to determine the number of justified complaints per 10,000 customers. Just curious where that per 10,000 comes from. Is that like an industry benchmark thing or?
Yeah, our understanding through some of those informal conversations that I and members of my team have had is that that is a method that's used to normalize so that the metric and the targets remain relevant even as the number of customers that we serve increases or decreases.
Okay. Thanks. Moving on to the safety and reliability PIM. I think there was already some discussion about this, but I'll start with the first proposed PIM, which is the response time to emergency calls, like during, not after hours. I think we already discussed this with the comp and benefits panel, but aren't gas operation employees already incentivized via their variable pay performance scorecards for gas emergency response time?
I apologize. Can you repeat that again?
Sure, I can give a reference. It's to a different testimony that I don't think anyone on, I'm not sure if anyone on this panel sponsored, but in YGS Employee 1, page 36, table YGS 9, there's a table there which, as I understand it, based on my cross of that panel, is representative of the variable pay scorecard for a gas operations employee. And one of the components of that scorecard, as I understand it, pertains to percentage of on-time emergency response.
Give us a moment.
Sure.
Can we just take a minute so we can pull that up? Thank you.
I'm so sorry, Attorney Wheel. I just wanted to make sure I understood the context of that attachment because it would inform my response most likely. Would you mind repeating the reference one more time for me? And I'll try to get to it quickly.
Yeah, it's a YGS Employee 1, which is the initial testimony of the compensation and benefits panel, page 36, table YGS 9.
Thank you.
And I'm specifically looking at, in that table, there's a measure labeled percentage gas emergency response dash on time.
Thank you, and sorry for that delay. I'll attempt to reply, and then Mr. Kelly, I think, can chime in. So my understanding of what the reference is to the employee testimony is there. Mr. Lazar is talking generally around how is how are the corporate goals established, which feeds into both the first step, which we talked about on a prior panel. I know that Mr. Lazar did, determining the level of funding for variable compensation to whatever level as a corporation, which has a financial component as well as an operational component. And then each individual employee has performance targets that are specific to their job function and specifications. So that's at the employee level. And certainly from a leadership perspective on down to the individual contributor, we try to establish metrics that are very much aligned, or targets, performance objectives that are very much aligned with the criteria that we're talking about here under PBR as a company. What we're talking about, though, the distinction is that under a PBR framework, we're trying to have a performance-based rate-making framework that is designed to align the company's, with a capital C, objective financially and operationally with that of our customers. So I think it's wholly consistent that under that framework, we are a performance-based company. I've been saying that again for the last 4 years and beyond as we've embraced PBR in other jurisdictions, that we pride ourselves in performing and performing well. And we challenge and encourage our employees to do that at all levels of the company. And this is just a way to have the rate-making framework be fully aligned with how we try to operate as a company.
Thanks. I guess like the fundamental question is, can you explain, aren't ratepayers already paying in the form of variable pay for pertinent members of the company to be incentivized in this respect to respond to emergencies? And I'm recognizing this is a downside only PIM. I'm just confused about like why there's this second, that's necessary for this second layer of financial incentive, recognizing the directionality of it.
Yeah, great question. I think that gets back to the whole policy objective, again, enacted by the legislature to try to have rates reflecting performance and requiring, at least for the EDCs in the state of Connecticut, to evaluate a PBR framework in a rate case. That policy objective that's established in law is saying that rates should be designed so that overall rates that ratepayers are paying are having rates reflecting the performance of the utility and ensuring that the rates that customers are paying are incentivizing the utility to perform in a superior way or differently than they are today. At least that's my understanding and expectation. And again, as a practitioner, I truly believe that is the right way for us to be setting rates at this point in our time here. I think that we have an opportunity, if Kira were to embrace it, to do just that. So again, I think those things are wholly consistent. The alternative attorney wheel that we are looking at is one that doesn't have any performance metrics or incentives. It doesn't have any changes in rates beyond the first year of the rate year, which means that as a utility, we would have no incremental resources financially to invest in incremental people, processes, or technology to better serve our customers or to pursue new and different activities, non-pipes alternatives, emissions reductions, et cetera. We would be embracing then the status quo, which is certainly something that PURA has the objective and wherewithal to do. I'm just suggesting that from a customer perspective, it is a much superior outcome if we were to have performance-based rate making. It is also one that would have rates more closely aligning with our costs so that we are able to attract those financial resources that we need in order to serve our customers. So I guess the short answer is I see no inconsistency at all. I think it's totally consistent with the premise and promise of PBR. That's a short, I'm incapable, you know this. I cannot have a short answer.
I did also want to notify everyone that our aspirational hour from yesterday might have overly aspirational, thanks in part to the contributions of Mr. Horton.
When I heard that was said, I thought he didn't know I was on this panel. That can't be.
Moving on to page 26 of the testimony, line 19. This just discusses the rationale for using a 9-year average for this PIM. And I saw the note that says, as opposed to the 4-year average, as I think Ms. Day, you referenced, was sort of like the standard, like that's the safety and reliability scorecard. It's a 4-year look back. And the quote here is, the 4-year average did not include enough years to encompass the company's historical performance in this area. What does that mean? Like, why was with respect to this data, 4 years is not enough, but 4 years was enough for other data?
One moment, please. Thank you for the time. So when we looked at our historical performance using a 4-year average, because of the deviation size is so small, statistically, we needed a larger sample set. And when you look at the 4-year average, it really doesn't tell a good story because that was layered in the COVID years where these types of calls were different and we didn't have as many. So when we look back, the 9-year performance, that gave us a better sample set, specifically in a category where we do perform very well. And again, top quartile. So when you factor in the smaller sample sets with this targeted deviation, it helps us better account for some of those anomalies across these calls that we receive year over year.
Okay. And why 9 years instead of 10 or 15 or 20? Like, is there a reason why specifically 9 was determined as being a better sample set than 4?
I believe the 9 years tied into a work management system update where we were tracking these types of calls in the system.
Okay. Page 27 of the testimony on lines 7 through 9 discusses how the target is calculated using 2 standard deviations from the baseline to account for random variations outside of the company's control. Why 2 standard deviations? Like, how is that established as the appropriate buffer?
Great question. So I think first off, when we're establishing the PBR, it's we need to create a fair and reasonable baseline. So when you look at our overall performance, we are operating, very high, but safety being the foundation of everything we do, this was important to look at it holistically and really understand what the resources of what the employees that support this metric do. This is a small sample, a small bucket, or a small element of all the work that these employees do every day. They're not sitting at a work center idling, waiting for an odor call to come in to respond. They have a lot of different tasks throughout the day. So when we're managing these resources, we're managing them in a way that we have many other obligations for our customers that we serve. So when we look at the sample set in our high performance, setting a baseline was fairly challenging when you're balancing all these different obligations we have. So when you look at the deviation being very small, it looks very small, however, it's fairly impactful. So again, to continue the theme of a lot of things happen on the system that we do not have control over, and those are emergencies. So when I talk about emergencies, those are, the anomalies that we're not planning for on a day-to-day basis. However, we do plan for them in a greater holistic resource plan. But on a day-to-day basis, things can happen on system where we have a hit or a damage, and the call comes in to Mr. Lawrence's call center, and our technicians have to respond immediately. We have inclement weather that could obstruct us from responding in a timely fashion, as well as, simple things like traffic. At certain times of day, we have challenges navigating across from one side of a city to the next. So these are the anomalies that will happen through our normal course of business. And we have to be mindful of all of those different factors when we set the baseline. So if we went down one standard deviation based off the performance, there was definitely a concern that it wasn't at the right set. So that's when we looked at 2 deviations to put us in a continued high performance category, which is, again, the baseline is significantly higher than what we look at in Massachusetts. So we thought it was reasonable.
Okay. So it was just a judgment call looking at one standard deviation. It just didn't seem appropriate. So the company just went to 2. That was the.
Well, we looked at all of the historical data and it put us right in line again with that high performing baseline.
The 2 standard deviation put you right in line with the high performing?
Maintains that high performing, correct.
Is that, you mean like 98.8 is closer to the historical data than 99.1 is? Is that what you mean by that?
No, again, it's accounting for all of those factors that I just put on notice that there are things that we cannot control. And this baseline is in target of that range.
To kind of add to that, so we would be responsible for, and in this instance, exceeding this target in each individual year, and an average represents more than 1 year, right? So you would expect to see more variation in a given year than you would see in an average. And so I think, to your point, in this setting of appropriate targets, there does have to be some subjective analysis on the part of our SMEs as to what we're willing to commit to when we're talking about, a lot of money that we would be accountable for. So in order to ensure that all of our SMEs, the people who are responsible for actually performing that work, can commit, they do have to use their subjective expertise to determine what's appropriate and what we can, again, commit to and what represents maintaining the same level of service.
Okay. The next PIM that's discussed, the emergency response rate after hours within 45 minutes. My understanding of that PIM is generally it's structured as a mechanism identically to this one, with the only differences being the historical data, the target, and the 45-minute standard, as opposed, and the kind of substantive components of it. So I guess my question is, I think all the questions I just asked about the other PIM, would the responses all be the same as to the second PIM?
That's accurate.
Okay, thank you. With respect to either of these PIMs, would meeting these targets require the company to incur incremental costs?
Under the current operation, no.
Okay.
I would like to note that these are penalty-only metrics, and therefore what we're trying to ensure in the penalty-only schema is that we're maintaining the same level of high performance, even as we're working to complete other very important objectives associated with the new pipeline safety regulations and the completion of the accelerated replacement program.
And just lastly, from a financial perspective too, I think it's important, but operationally, the team can chime in, that even just maintaining a level of performance does require ongoing investment for us to be able to maintain a level of service, not even to improve. So I would expect that your question was, are we going to be required to spend incremental investment for these targets? I think with incremental in my mind is incremental beyond that which is established in base rates. The answer would be yes, because we would have to be making ongoing investments just to be able to maintain. And if we didn't, then I would expect to see over time, certainly a degradation of the metric.
Okay. So would those incremental investments be captured in the company's overall revenue requirements proposal here, inclusive of the multi-year rate plan proposal and the attrition relief mechanism?
That is exactly our design and why I continue to harp on that and having the PBR framework, that the framework needs to be comprehensive from, in the REO1 world, all three reopeners. We have to have the rate-making framework align with the PET metrics that are implemented and with the long-term performance plans from a capital planning perspective.
Okay.
All needs to be linked together.
So conceptually then, if PURA disagreed with a target, it would be appropriate for them to adjust the revenue requirement to account for an adjustment to the target?
I think that I track your question. I don't know how you do that unless it's as part of the K-bar. If PURA disagreed with a category of expenditures that we've included in either the K-bar or the DIMP, then I could envision, it's challenging in a hypothetical, perhaps the operation of those mechanisms would be adjusted. Otherwise, though, I don't know how that would work because the overarching framework of PBR is just at its base, forget for a moment the K-bar or the DIMP tracker, the I minus X parameter is just taking your cast off rates and then setting a trajectory of rate changes over the course of the PBR term that's designed to track with the average industry participants' cost trends over time. And so we're starting with a baseline that's the cost of service approved in this proceeding, representative costs in the test year as adjusted for known and measurable changes, and then just trending those changes over time. So I could imagine in that frame, I don't see how an adjustment could be made, certainly not based on the record evidence in this proceeding, since it hasn't been investigated to any extent, how an adjustment could be made to the PBR framework that would accomplish what you're saying.
Yeah, I understand it'd be hard to make an adjustment, but I don't understand, like if PURA were to not accept the targets and accept some lower level of performance, wouldn't that mean then that if the proposed revenue requirement weren't adjusted, that customers would be overpaying for the level of performance that PURA is directing the company to perform?
I see. I don't see it that way, but I understand your point. I think what I would say is, in my mind, and again, it hasn't been robustly analyzed in this proceeding, but in the electric company companion proceedings, we've been looking at three separate tracks. There's the REO1, rate making, REO2 metrics, and REO3 is the planning. And I do see those things all needing to work together, because if in the planning paradigm, and again, here's what we're saying is essentially all within this proceeding, here's what the system needs, here's what the ARP investments are required to be made, here's the agent asset of the system that we need to continue to maintain. All of that comes together in our proposal. But what we're saying in the electric company proceedings is that we do need, maybe there's not a direct line, and I know the OCC doesn't agree that REO3 needs to have any direct line into the rate-making framework, but in my mind, it's all linked. Because if we're in the REO3 docket, if we had a comparable one here, to say that a certain avenue or pursuit of investments in people, processes, and technologies is not something that PURA supports from a policy standpoint, then there would be an adjustment. And that adjustment would flow through both the metrics and then the establishment of the rate-making framework in REO1. I think the way that would manifest itself here would be an adjustment to the allowable expenditures either under the DIMP reconciling mechanism or under operation of the K-bar. It would be a signal from PURA to say that we don't want the company to pursue X, Y, or Z, and then that would have to align with the REO1 adjustments. I think on the flip side, Attorney Wheel, what I'm saying is, and back to Consumer Counsel Coleman's first question, that's why we can't have it be that we embrace the adoption of performance metrics that are going to change, presumably, our level and standard of service without having a companion rate-making paradigm accompanying that, so that we have the financial resources to go and pursue that change and invest in the people, processes, and technology. But I think the flip side of that argument is just what you're saying. Somehow there would have to be an adjustment. If PURA doesn't want us to pursue certain investments in people, processes, and technologies, then we shouldn't have the financial resources to do that. So I don't disagree with the sentiment. I just don't know how you get there unless you adjust what's in the K-bar. I will also say, though, that's why I think another critical component of it is an earning sharing mechanism, to the extent that something like that happens and then we have additional resources that aren't being expended, that will flow back to customers over the pendency of the plan.
Well,
it's as a safeguard. It's as a safeguard.
So long as the expenditures between the revenues and the bottom line nothing changes, right? Like that safeguard, the ESM safeguard only works if there aren't incremental expenditures sort of that impact the flow of the revenue, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And one clarifying question, I think you already responded to this in response to Consumer Counsel Coleman, but you're discussing the interaction of the financially impactful PIMs and the other components of the proposed revenue requirement and not the just tracking metrics. Is that correct?
I think you mean, are you asking, because there was a question, would we be opposed to there being metrics if PBR is not adopted?
Yes.
Okay, I think I agree with what you're saying then, yes.
Okay. I'm on to my second to last area, which is the second to last mechanism, which is the gas emergency calls. I do have fewer questions also for these last two than I've had before. The average speed of answer, PIM, looking at the testimony on page 37, the most recent speed recorded in 2023 is 23 seconds, and the proposed metric is also 23 seconds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the slowest speed over the past 4 years is 29 seconds. I guess I just have similar questions, kind of understanding the ultimate target here as being, I understand it's derived from an average, but I mean, practically looking at the numbers, this is like zero improvement from the most recent data, correct?
Correct.
So how is that an aspirational target then?
I would say that it is a target because it highlights the importance of maintaining strong performance in this particular metric. And so we set this target through consultation with our partners in gas operations. So we know that right now, this is what we are performing with what we think are really strong staffing policies. And in our conversations with them, they say that this is more than perfectly acceptable in order to support a rapid response to a gas emergency.
Okay. Can you explain how the gas emergency calls work? Like, are they routed to a dedicated department for emergencies, or like when the call comes in? Can you explain like how the information gets to the emergency response folks in gas operations?
Yes, happy to. So during normal business hours, it's the number one priority. So the next available, if a gas emergency call comes in, it gets routed to the next available call handler who is skilled for gas emergency calls. So it essentially moves to the top of the queue. On weekends, between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., we have dedicated single-skilled individuals who handle that during those off-hour periods. And then similarly, it's handled again, top of the queue, outside of the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. window on the weekends.
Okay, thank you. We discussed earlier I have another question about variable pay, and I recognize this panel might not be the experts in that area, but we discussed earlier with Mr. Horton that there's sort of the overall framework for establishing a pool of funding, and then there's individual variable pay components on an individual employee level. My understanding, based on like all the testimony in this proceeding, is that we don't have the data for every single Yankee employee's individual goals. I know there's a late file asking for like a couple of examples. Is this panel aware of whether there are any employees who have a variable pay component that's tied to emergencies call speed of answer?
I do not know off the top of my head, but I could read that in.
Could I just ask for a late file?
Sure. Yeah.
Of just responding whether any exist, and if so, like how many employees have a variable pay metric tied to the speed of answer for emergency calls.
Thank you. That will be late file exhibit 130.
Thanks. And I think I already know the answer to this question based on the multiple conversations along this same line, but I'll ask it anyway. Page 37, line 1 of the testimony says that this proposed PIM will, quote, motivate Yankee to invest resources into this aspect of the business to receive and respond to calls quicker and more efficiently. So is that a reference to incremental investments that are necessary in order to achieve this PIM target?
I think so. And I think this is a good illustration of what I was trying to say before. Certainly our objective from an individual contributor up to the highest levels of the company is to develop for those that are eligible, the incentive variable component of their compensation, have targets that reflect superior performance and then reward that performance. That's the culture that we have, established and embraced at Eversource. The idea here is but an individual contributor, for example, is it only able to do the best that they're able to do? There comes a point in time where as a total company, if we're trying to meet and exceed an expectation as a total company measure, that then requires the company and the leaders of the company to have the financial resources and then invest in incremental additional people, processes, and technologies. That's why I think the two things are totally aligned. Having an individual's objectives align with the best interests of customers, for sure, and then also having the financial rate-making framework be one that has the company's objectives aligning with all of those in this evolving world, customer expectations of the services that the utility is providing it. So that's why I see those two things as being totally linked together.
Thanks.
May we confer for one moment, please?
Sure.
Thank you, Attorney Wheel. The one other comment I'd like to add to that is that because this is primarily a staffing strategy, it's something that we address through staffing strategies. Just based on general labor inflation, every year it gets approximately 3% more expensive to achieve the same level of performance. And so being able to continue to invest in the workforce is another reason why we made that statement.
Okay. Yeah, and I was going to ask the next question of what specific investments this is referencing. So the general reference here to continue the investment in resources of this aspect of the business to receive and respond to calls quicker and more efficiently would be incremental, maintaining staff or adding incremental staff?
It is now. Previously, I referenced the fact that we replaced our ACD and telephony system, which has made us much more nimble in that space. And now that foundation is there, the incremental investments would be to maintain and improve the staffing necessary.
Okay. Thank you. Last set of questions are about the methane emissions reduction PIM, which Consumer Counsel Coleman already referenced. I think I just have one or two questions. How, I think Ms. Day may have already answered this, but how specifically, like what activities would Yankee engage in to reduce the G3 SEI leaks?
That's a great question. It is multifaceted. So I'm sorry, I'll try to be brief. Obviously, one of the things that we do that ultimately reduces the grade 3 SEI leaks is removing our leak-prone pipe from the system, right? That's what's most likely to leak. And those are the leaks that are more likely to be big. However, leaks still occur. And so what we do to address each leak that occurs is we repair it, right? And that remediates it. And there are certain required timelines for different categories of leaks. Grade 3 SEI leaks, even in the new pipeline safety regulations, do not have this strict of a target. Getting rid of ensuring that we only have a specific inventory at the end of the year. This is a completely new target that would require us to specifically track these, track their age, devote resources to repairing them on a specific timeline, even given the other constraints of the business. So that is the additional work associated with this specific category of leaks.
Okay, and would that work be through the DIMP program?
Yeah, so, right, so there are two parts of it, right? So for the first part, you're right, that is through the DIMP program. And we do expect that at the end of, DIMP. So a big piece of DIMP is ARP. And I'm going to try to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So sorry, I'm taking a minute. So in our DIMP tracker, we specifically identified the items associated with the new pipeline safety regulations and then also ARP. So ARP is included in the DIMP tracker. And we do believe that that would have an impact on this. And I think when you look at the existing data and you see the number kind of already going down, I think that's reflective of that. However, as I mentioned, we do still have those leaks, and the repair of those leaks would not be included in the DIMP tracker, if that's your question.
Yeah, so would the repair of the leaks be through the K-bar like would be the funding of that be coming through the K-bar mechanism or like a base rate component?
It's a great question, and I'll probably need some of my colleagues to help me. A lot of the work associated with repairing leaks is O&M expense. So the portion associated with O&M expense would not be included in the K-bar. Thank you, Mr. Horton. However, sometimes we do repair leaks with capital means. I won't go into that. I could talk at length, but I won't. And so in those instances, I believe that would be included in the K-bar.
Understood. So getting back to a theme I think I've asked a couple of times. So is the proposed revenue requirement in this case inclusive of including the DIMP tracker, the K-bar, and the level of O&M imputed in base rates structured to be able to meet this standard to mitigate these leaks, the grade 3 leaks?
Yes, because my understanding is the entire design includes our O&M expense, right?
And just to be overly clear, I think we are on the same page, but just because you said the components, that's right. Our proposal in this case, our PBR proposal and the associated metrics is one that if implemented together and, in a reasonable outcome, one that we feel that we can make a commitment to stay out of a rate case for 4 years and deliver the benefits of PBR to our customers while adhering to the metrics that we've put out. And if we don't, we've established penalties so that we have a financial penalty if we aren't meeting a level of performance. But it's not one that the revenue requirement, because that's a particular term of art to me, that means the revenue requirement based on a historical test year. If that is implemented for simply rate year 1, that's why, no, we can't then agree to a stay out or to any performance metrics under or targets because we don't feel that we'd have the resources without filing a rate case in, as early as 2 years from when the order's issued, if not sooner.
Thanks. I guess, and I understand the confusion. When I said revenue requirement, I did mean the entire proposal the company has in this rate case, including the 4-year multi-year rate plan. But I did want to make, I guess, like my question is, and it's kind of just a conceptual question, if like all those costs are sort of baked into the sauce of the 4-year multi-year rate plan and all those elements, then why are we all paying an incremental $1 million incentive on top of all of that in order to accomplish the work that's already being paid for through the revenues?
I see what you're saying. Okay. So I think what I would say to that, it's a really good question, is that we have, for all of these, there's a reasonable measure of expectation for our performance in any given year. So with a PBR framework, we're making a commitment to avoid a rate case and all the things that I've said. And we have confidence that if we have a reasonable outcome of this case, inclusive of all the components that we've proposed, adjusted reasonably based on the record evidence, we have confidence that we can adhere to the standards that we proposed. And then we propose penalties in the event that we do worse than what we think is a reasonable standard. And we have incentives to the extent that we're able to perform better. So it isn't to say that customers are already paying us for a certain level of service and we're just asking them to give us more for that same level of service. We've taken we put a lot of effort into trying to devise the penalties and incentives to the point that if we're degrading our service under this commitment that we've made, if our service is degrading, that we'll be financially held accountable for that in the form of penalties. But on the flip side, for certain of those, to the extent that we're delivering superior performance, not just status quo, that those would be then eligible for an incentive.
Okay.
And that customers would be benefiting from the fact that we're delivering superior service for those metrics.
Okay. And for this particular mechanism, I guess for any mechanism, for the tables and the testimony that show the baseline, would that be representative of like the expected level of service absent the effect of any penalty, or like that's the expected results absent the additional incentive one way or the other of the penalty or reward?
I don't know. I think that if we look just at table 5, which is on page 37, and this is specifically related to gas emergency calls, average speed of answer in seconds, so 23 seconds. Your question was basically, is that our baseline? I think, or maybe.
Well, it's helpful to look at the table. I was actually asking about the one labeled baseline, which is 24 seconds. Just trying to understand, like, conceptually, based on your testimony just now, it sounds like conceptually there's sort of like a baseline level of service that's accounted for in the overall package of revenue inclusive of the multi-year rate plan, but before taking into consideration the performance incentive mechanisms. Would that, and that the company exceeding that level of performance may qualify them for a reward, or falling short of that level of performance may qualify for a penalty. Is the level of expected performance represented where in the baselines in this testimony?
I mean, I think the only reason I'm hesitating is because of your question on tying to the level of performance that's within rates or within the revenue requirement established in the proceeding. Because we didn't, I will say, it isn't that we developed like a bottoms up to say, okay, if I minus X is this and the K bar is that and the DIMP is this, then that will give us 23 seconds. And if those three things change incrementally one way or another, now it's 24 or 22. So I'm getting a little bit hung up on if I'm going to be held to that later, that 20, you told me it's 24 seconds. That's what you, and so that's my only hesitation. I think conceptually what we've done is we've used our historical performance to establish a baseline of how we have performed in these areas. And then we've taken that and for each one proposed a target or a benchmark, many of them with a financial tie to them. Again, that if under PBR, we feel it will give us the opportunity to meet the benchmark, meet the level that we've established, but then also to be held accountable to the event, like I said, that if our performance goes down, we're going to be penalized, and if our performance exceeds that level, that we'd have an opportunity for incentive for at least some of them.
Thank you. It helps the company feel better. I think my question included the word conceptually. I did mean conceptually when I was in reference to the baseline. I was just trying to understand the concept that was discussed, it's not OCC's intention to later argue that the baselines in this testimony represent a level of service that has to be adhered to given the revenue requirement. And I think that, I guess the last question with respect to this, last question hopefully of the day with respect to this mechanism is, if this mechanism, if PURA determined that the proposed multi-year rate plan, the K-bar, this mechanism aren't the way to move forward, does that mean the company is not going to be able to continue to repair leaks and maintain the system?
Again, I'll start, but my colleagues will please chime in. We fundamentally have a obligation to safely serve our customers, our colleagues, and we need to maintain that, and we will. There's a fundamental obligation as well for rates to reflect our costs. And we need to have, and again, where I started, the legislature has indicated its intent and desire to have rates reflect a level of performance. And the reason I'm long-winded is because I passionately believe that performance-based rate making is the right way for us to be setting rates at this point in time, so that rates can be aligned with the services that customers are receiving. I believe in this model, and I think it's the right way for us to do it. We have to maintain that obligation to serve our customers. If rates don't align with our costs, the only recourse we will have is two. One, which I'm certain that we would never make a decision to not safely serve our customers. But if we aren't able, so putting that aside, if we either have an option to not make an investment, to not spend a dollar, whether it's on people, processes, or technologies, or if we have to, in the obligation of services to our customers, make that investment, but we don't have the revenues to support that level of investment, then our recourse becomes to have rate cases. So performance-based rate making is a regulatory framework that allows for the utility to in theory at least, have the financial resources to serve its customers and make a commitment to avoid rate cases where all costs are updated in rates. If we don't have a comprehensively designed framework that allows us to do those things, then our recourse will be to make the commitment or make the investments that we have to make, no more. And then, to the extent our rates become misaligned with our costs, we will then file rate cases. And our expectation is based on the level of investment the system needs to safely serve our customers in the absence of a PBR framework like that which we have proposed, or if the outcome of this proceeding tracks with the outcomes of similar rate cases recently in Connecticut, we would expect to be having multiple things happening. One is that if the outcome is consistent with other cases which have been anti-utility infrastructure investment, there would be a corresponding downgrade in our credit rating, and then the framework would result in one that we have to refile rate cases sequentially, repetitively, so that our revenues can be brought up to speed to align with our costs. We can't make investments to serve our customers if we don't have rates that align with our costs.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to ask one follow-up. It sounds like you're trying to make or you are making a distinction between services required to maintain the safety of your system. It seems, and I just want to confirm if the implication is correct, but it seems like you're implying in response to Attorney Wheel's question about the impact on leak repair rates and processes, that you view the leak repairs as something separate from that safety and maintaining service responsibility?
If you don't mind, Mr. Horton, just because this is specifically talking about leaks, and I know that we have a specific metric associated with leaks. So as I attempted to describe before, we have lots of mandated timelines associated with leak repairs, and the majority of those timelines are associated with the safety impact of those leaks. So the most dangerous leaks are what we call our Class 1 leaks, and we are required to repair those essentially immediately or stay there and watch it until it can be repaired, right? Those are the most important from a safety perspective. The metric that we proposed, grade 3 leaks of significant environmental impact, those grade 3 leaks are sometimes also called non-hazardous leaks. So those are the ones where we don't believe there is an immediate hazard. And part of the reason why we chose this and the way that we designed that specific metric was to require us to make additional effort to repair that on a faster timeline than is required currently, by regulation or in the new pipeline safety regulations that are going to become effective on January 1st, 2027. So although all leaks do have a safety impact, I think we all recognize that there's an incremental level of safety, right? So in addition to the fact that these are specifically categorized as non-hazardous leaks, but the main purpose in trying to develop that additional requirement for these leaks was focused on the emissions impact and not the safety impact. I don't know if hopefully that helps with that specific item. Anyway, I'll leave it to Mr. Horton to address perhaps the rest of the question.
Thank you. I think you covered it.
Just briefly, no, I'm just kidding.
Well, that was OCC's last question for this panel, as long as the panel's done testifying.
Thank you. My understanding is that CIEC reached out to the case coordinator and has waived cross. Authority staff, BOE. Okay.
Morning or afternoon. I don't know what time it is. Afternoon. Good afternoon.
I just have a few questions on a conversation you had earlier with Attorney Wheel on the customer service complaints. The end of last week, we had a similar conversation with the customer service panel. I feel myself a little more confused than when I started off. So just want to make sure I understood everything. And I'm gonna start way back at the basics. So customer calls, that could be a complaint or an inquiry. Is that correct?
It depends on whether the customer has contacted us before about that issue. So if it's their first outreach, it would not be a complaint.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
By this definition.
by this definition, is this definition written down anywhere? Is it in a response or a policy somewhere?
Yeah, it's.
Okay, it is. It is.
That's okay.
I thought it was, but I want to make sure. Okay. And so can you just, I guess, not per what's in the proposal, but just back up. How does the company define a complaint and how do they define an inquiry?
So a complaint for the purposes of this,
Yeah.
of this metric
Yeah.
is when a customer has contacted us with an issue and we have failed to resolve their issue and they feel then that they need to reach out to an external party to intervene.
Okay.
And that's specifically what we're looking to collaboratively work to reduce with EOE here. So specifically, for this particular metric, that is our definition of a complaint.
Okay. And is that respect of, not to go back to customer service, but say there was a missed appointment by the company, but they're calling for the first time on that?
Correct.
That would be an inquiry, even though the company missed an appointment.
Yes, because we would endeavor to solve it, make it right by the customer with that contact when they bring to our attention that we missed the appointment. If we failed to satisfy the customer in that contact and then they felt they needed to escalate or bring it to EOE, then that would be a complaint.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's, I don't want to be general, but it's, an inquiry is the first contact, as you were saying, and then a complaint is anytime the first contact doesn't resolve the issue.
No, what I would say is if, because we have, contacts can often take multiple, I'm sorry, inquiries can often take multiple contacts. But if we have essentially closed the issue with the customer, but it turns out to be due to an error on our part, not to their satisfaction, and they require additional, that's when it becomes a complaint.
Okay.
Makes sense.
And then, so I think what I was understanding is, so when it's escalated through EOE, or I don't want to say the word escalated right now, when it comes through EOE, that's a complaint.
That is a complaint, yes.
Right. And then we had a conversation regarding the justified complaints versus what we're calling unjustified complaints. Okay.
Yes.
And then what is it? Is it also a complaint if it comes from an different outside source? So if it's OCC,
Yes.
AG, all of that would be considered a complaint.
Yes, but that's not what we're proposing for the PBR, but yes.
Understood. I'm just trying to get a sense of the different words. So, because in EOE 21, the question was complaints, but then in OCC 329, it was called escalations. What's the difference between a complaint and an escalation?
So I want to consult with the response to OCC 329. I have it in my head, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you a consistent answer. And apologies, it's going to take me a minute to open up that folder.
All right, you didn't know I was asking questions.
Okay, I'm with you. Can you ask the question again, please? I
So-
apologize.
Just define what an escalation is for me.
An escalation is it's typically when a customer is speaking with one of our representatives or having a contact, whether it's live or through a digital channel, and feels like they're not getting the resolution and they ask and somebody else from Eversource, typically in the chain of command, needs to intervene to help resolve the customer's issue.
Okay. And so now going back to the beginning, for the scorecard, right, I believe we're talking about.
Yep.
It's just the complaints that are,
Yes, so and I'm so glad you're asking these questions because I want to clarify this. Our purpose in proposing this PBR was to address what I think is the shared frustration amongst us, amongst EOE and other stakeholders at the level of complaints that are coming to EOE and generally. And so what we recognize is that there's a broad spectrum of causes for that. We want to take direct accountability through the PBR scorecard for those for which we are responsible for the root cause, but we also want to use this as a foundation for ongoing collaboration to just develop that collective understanding of all the root causes. So even if the answer isn't specifically something that Eversource has to fix unilaterally, that we all are understanding, working together to reduce that volume of complaints in total. So this is not only designed to push that accountability on us, but to also allow us to collectively reduce the number of instances that customers feel that they need to reach out to EOE. So that's the purpose of this.
it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's sort of, yes, it's about complaints, but also we are seeking that might be a changing definition over.
Yeah, so, and thank you for that question, Attorney Wyman. What we envision this being a collaborative discussion as to whether a complaint is justified.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think those were all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Attorney General. Commissioner Karen,
No questions.
Commissioner Conti.
Just one question. Yesterday, there was a lot of cross on stakeholder process. So just a question on the proposal here. Did the company include any input from CNG, SCG, CIEC, or any other stakeholder in coming up with this proposal?
In regards to the
PBR proposal, yeah, in the rate case.
I can speak to the overall framework. We didn't reach out to get input from the parties you referenced in terms of the framework. I'm not sure if in the metrics that we had, but again, I've been participating personally and as a company in the ongoing REO1, REO2, and REO3 dockets on the electric side. So avid participation there, and the proposal that we have here is wholly consistent with, our position there, which I would characterize as being generally in line, at least on a foundational and principled basis, with every other participant around the table. Not always aligned with the straw proposals that PURA has issued in every aspect or in some of the critical aspects, but our proposal fundamentally, in my mind, is wholly consistent with views of others in that proceeding.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, just I getting very confused about the definition of complaints. So the complaints that come through EOE, AG, and OCC, they are or are not reflected on the scorecard?
These are just the complaints that come through EOE through our formal resolution process that we have established with EOE.
Okay. Is it an objective mistake for an employee to miss an appointment with a customer?
It depends on whether they follow the outbound communications protocol or not to inform the customer. So there are situations when it is acceptable to miss an appointment, assuming that we've notified the customer, and situations that we would say that it was unacceptable if we did not attempt to contact the customer. But Kevin, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, just to add to that, and obviously we've talked about many different calls that we have. So for an example of that excused missed appointment, I guess, would be that our technician who was assigned to that particular customer got an emergency call, hit main or an order call, and therefore couldn't make the timeline for the missed appointment. Certainly we would be, the expectation would be the employee calls the customer to explain that and hopefully reschedule testimony that I talked about earlier, but that would be one example of a reason why we would miss and why we would follow up with the customer.
Okay, so in that scenario, if the customer had a scheduled appointment and the company missed it and the customer called in to complain, the company would not treat it as a complaint because it was the first time they called and they're excusing the company. I'm just lost about your definition of who gets to make an objective mistake and why even in a situation of an objective mistake, the first time the customer calls is not treated as a complaint? Or did I not understand that?
No, you did. I think you did. And it is a little bit gray in an area that, from an operation standpoint, from my standpoint, if we missed an appointment due to an emergency and we made the proper communication to the customer to try to either reschedule that appointment, delay that appointment, or reschedule it for another day to meet the convenience of the customer, that's one thing. But if we just missed an appointment, and that is rare that that happens, if we just missed an appointment from Mr. Lawrence's side, where the call came in, if we miss an appointment, a scheduled appointment, we have our dispatch folks track that, and then we have contact out to the customer. So we kind of handle that complaint within gas operations. If we miss the appointment, that would probably alleviate the customer from calling into Mr. Lawrence's call center. Does that make sense? And that's why I talk a little bit about it. From an operations standpoint, we would handle that within operations, to determine why we missed that call and make sure that we follow up with the customer. If the customer called directly right into Mr. Lawrence's call center or contact center, that would probably be handled differently. And
Sorry about that. And what I might add too is that we have protocols and expectations that we would make the customer satisfied, apologize, and offer whatever concessions are necessary to make the customer satisfied, so they didn't feel that they needed to then escalate to EOE. If we were unsuccessful in that mitigation with the customer and they escalated to EOE, that's what we're considering a complaint for the purposes of this scorecard.
Okay, so it would not be registered as a complaint unless the customer followed up to EOE.
For this particular scorecard, yes, because it's focused on the formal complaint process.
Okay. All right, thank you. I believe that's it for me. So does the company need a moment to consider redirect?
I would like 5 minutes, please, for redirect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the latitude to have a few extra minutes. I appreciate that. And we do have some questions for redirect. I'd like to start first with a very important topic that we want to make sure we get crystal clear for the record for the benefit of our three commissioners. I'm going to start first with the president of the company. So, Mr. Kelly, do you recall questions earlier today where there were questions about what happens if PBR is not implemented? Do you recall that line of inquiry?
I do.
And to be crystal clear for the record, if the authority does not approve the company's PBR proposal, in your view as the company president, is there some impact on our commitment to safety and reliability for our customers?
No, there is not.
Okay. And so in your view, if Pura does not approve the company's PBR proposal, we continue to have that 100% commitment to providing safe and reliable service for our customers. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I just want to add that when we go through this process, I don't want that to be something that people walk away from, that we would not provide safe and reliable service to our customers. We are mandated through state and federal code requirements to provide that service. We are a heavily driven compliance company, and we have obligations. We will continue to make sure that we meet those obligations at all times.
Thank you for confirming that for the record, Mr. Kelly. Now, I would like to stay along that line of inquiry that was received, because again, there were a series of questions that dealt with what happens if the PBR proposal is not approved. From a rate-making perspective, Mr. Horton, if the authority were not to approve the company's PBR proposal, can you provide more information just in terms of what may be the impacts from a rate-making or frequency of rate case perspective?
Thank you. And I appreciate Mr. Kelly's clarification. I hope that none of my testimony earlier, at times windy, I realize, and long-winded, was intended to apply anything other. All I'm intending to get across is that given the compliance requirements that we have and that Mr. Kelly is making crystal clear are not at jeopardy or tied at all to the rate-making framework. We have to make the investments that we have to make to keep the system safe. And in the absence of a performance-based rate-making framework or a framework that acknowledges those costs, then the utility's only recourse is to file more frequent rate cases and to experience the increases in rates through rate cases that are going to be more choppy and lumpy and poorer customer experience over time. So that was the point that I'm intending to make throughout.
Thank you. We have one final series of questions. My colleague, Attorney Tisler, will take those on a very technical issue.
Thank you. Ms. Day, do you recall the conversation that the panel engaged in with Attorney Wheel regarding baselines and targets of the proposed PIMs?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And Ms. Day, can you provide some examples of how the targets interact with the triggers that would actually, trigger a penalty or an incentive for the PIMs?
Yes, great question. So the best way to understand the targets for the penalty or incentive is to probably carefully read the written testimony in Exhibit YGS Metrics 1, the actual, not the table, but the written description, because it does vary for each individual metric. So for our symmetric PIMs, where we're proposing both a penalty and an incentive, I'll just go through 2 examples. So the first example, is the metric associated with a grade 3 leaks of significant environmental impact. So what we have as a baseline is 1,449 metric tons. What we have proposed as a target is 725. But if you read the summary on page 41, it says that we would be subject to a penalty if we exceed 1,449, and we would get an incentive if we get that down to 0. So that's a little bit different. And then if we go back to the average speed of answer, which is on page 37 of that exhibit, it describes that for that symmetric PIM, we would be subject to the penalty if we do not meet that 23 target. So if we are higher than the 23 seconds, and if we improve below that 23 to 22, then we would get the incentive. So for those metrics, I think it's important to read the descriptions associated with each individual item, because it does vary, and even in terms of whether we're over or under, what's important varies by individual metric.
Thank you. That's all the questioning we have.
Thank you. That concludes today's business. So I'll pause and solicit any administrative matters before we adjourn for the day. Any from the company? Oh, Attorney Tisler, I should say, we confirmed you are correct. Read and see was provided. So my notes now match yours that the outstanding read-in is you.
Okay, thank you. No additional administrative matters from the company.
Thank you. Anything from any other party or intervener? All right, seeing none, we will reconvene on Monday at 10 a.m. and the first panel will be the company's cost of capital panel, please.